I'm Vernon Hektner, and this is March of 2008. I was born in 1921, so if you do the math, you know, I've been around a long time, kind of long in the tooth, as they say. I had parents, Joe and Mabel Hektner. She was Mabel Huss before. She married my dad. My grandparents all came from Norway, and we lived on a farm near Morton, and the farm was just 4 or 5 miles out of Morton, and it was on the site where my grandfather homesteaded in the 1880s. In 1920, my folks were married, and in 1921, in October, knowing that I was on the way and was about to be born, my dad cranked up the old Model T with the side curtains and all, and took me to Morton. It took Mother and me, apparently still unborn, to Morton, and we got on the train, and they went to Fergus Falls. My grandfather, Huss, had retired the previous year from farming near Morton to Fergus Falls. And my paternal grandparents, Martin and Andrea Hektner, had retired the same year to Fargo. And so we went to Fergus, and I was born there in the hospital. And when I was something like 5, 6 days old, Dad came down on the train and picked Mother and me up, and we went back to Morton and out on the farm. And as Leona said, no electricity or anything like that. The farm was a complete farm in the sense that we had geese, and we had turkeys, and we had chickens, sheep, pigs, cows, horses, one dog, dozens of cats. It was a complete farm that way. My dad used to say you could always tell the difference between a German farm and a Norwegian farm, and where we lived, the minority were the Norwegians, the more Germans. And the Germans had gardens. You could see those straight rows and vegetables of all kinds. And you come to a Norwegian farm, if there wasn't a garden, it was pretty small, and it usually wasn't too attractive. But they usually had flowers up by the house. That's how you could tell the difference, you see. And I know we got vegetables from our German neighbors that we never thought of raising ourselves. Well, anyway, it was a complete farm. The biggest event, I suppose, of my farm life was the Big Depression. When the crops dried out, we got no return. I know one year, 1934, my father didn't thresh a single bundle. And things were tight. And we went on the barter system, in the sense that wheat brought the eggs and the cream into the store in Morton, and we took the groceries back out in the egg case after, and with the empty cream can. And there'd be a peddler come along, out of Minneapolis even, selling fresh fruit. And that was a barter. He'd show a Mother a crate of apricots, for instance, or cherries, peaches, and I'd have to have 5 old hens for this, and I want 6 for this, and 4 for that or something. Box of grapes with that little wire handle, you know. And so we ate pretty well. In the wintertime, my dad would send, being Norwegian, he sent to Sam Johnson in Duluth and got Lake Superior herring, frozen. And we kept it on the north side of the house because we had no refrigerator. And we ate, it was a great big box, many, many pounds. and we ate good fish all winter, and had to get rid of it before it melted in the spring, however. So we ate. My mother cooked a lot of, rather canned a lot of meats, sausage, meatballs, and all that sort of thing. And then we froze a lot, and then smoked a lot. We had our own smokehouse where Dad did the bacons and hams and so on. And then after they were done, toward the summer, we would bury them in the oats bin in the granary and drag them out. For some reason or other, they felt they kept better there. And we had smoked meat throughout the summer that way. I'd like to say something about the difficulties on the farm that made me, or gave me, the ambition to get off this darn farm as soon as I could. Now my brother, Donald, only a year younger than I, was just the opposite. He loved everything about farming. So when the time came as to who's going to get the farm, no argument. I was off, he got it. Because there were just the two of us boys besides some girls. He and I got along very well because we were very different. He was very mechanical, he could make anything run, and loved the farm. He was very athletic. He could come to a telephone pole and just go up the top. I couldn't have got myself off the ground if a bear were after me. You know, we were very different that way. But we got along very well. And the older we got, the more we got along, because he was easygoing, and we had different interests, and so there was no competition as far as we were concerned. The big change that came along out on the farm came as we got out of the Depression and the war was starting. In 1941, we got electricity. And so I was going to school, college in Wahpeton here, and sitting at home with a kerosene lamp, studying my Hamlet, Shakespeare, which I love that sort of thing. And now when I tell my kids that, they seem to think I'm Abraham Lincoln's younger brother or something, you know, that I studied in college by a kerosene lamp, which I did. I should say something about the schools that I went to. I was in a country school, Barney number 4, and some years later I went back and I had I think we took a picture where I, pointing out where I carved my initials in the wall of the old school. Of course the school is long since gone. It was in the same section where my grandfather homesteaded. Then we moved up on the highway as my dad bought his own farm, and we went to Barney number 1, and that was along the highway, and 2 years there, and then I was going to go to Morton High School. Well, they closed the high school that year, in 1935, and instead they consolidated with Wahpeton. So I got to go to Wahpeton High School as a freshman. It was the first class that came in by bus. Well, they didn't have any buses, so they hauled us in a cattle truck with some planks in it to sit on nail kegs. And in those days, of course, girls had to wear dresses. They were very long skirts, but they weren't allowed to wear pants. And dusty. You have to remember, of course, that the highway was gravel and dust. And, sometimes I wonder how clean we looked when the bus kids got out here in Wahpeton to go to school. But we made it. And then when I got through high school, I went to science for 2 years, junior college, and my dad had just figured out, we'll go up to Fargo and buy a car. And so he bought a Model A Ford for $100 and brought it home. And I was going to haul 5 girls back and forth between Morton and Wapaton. They were in high school, and they got pushed off the bus because they weren't from Morton Township. They were from Barney and Ibsen and townships. So we got some money from those families for driving, and I went through college and actually made money rather than lost any. Tuition when I went to college started was $14 a quarter, and my books cost under $10, and I remember paying $2 for a dictionary, which I thought was awful. Well, then when I left junior college, I went to Concordia. 3 of my uncles had graduated there, and I went up there and ended up being the class orator. I did manage to graduate with honors, and then I got a scholarship to Syracuse University in New York, which, so everybody congratulated me and thought it was great stuff. So I got on the train and went to Syracuse and got there in the middle of June and had my fresh BA in hand, and I got to thinking as we went into this is going to give me a master's degree in public administration, and I kind of wanted to be a history teacher. I didn't want to be a bureaucrat sitting in Washington, which this master's degree would lead me to. So I was there about a month and decided, this isn't for me. So I packed up and went home and got back here. Went up to Concordia to see if they had any jobs, and one of the jobs I interviewed for was in Christine. Had I taken that job, I would have been there when Leona was a senior in high school. But I wasn't too interested in that job. I took one in Hewlin, Minnesota, $1,530 for the 9 months, and went up there. And by then I had sold the old car, of course, so I didn't have a car. As I said, I bought it for $100, sold it for $65 after putting 30,000 miles on it. Anyway, when I was at Concordia, I had a room on the south side of the old dormitory. And after I got to know Leona, I found out from looking at a picture that she had. Some friend of hers took a picture of her looking out of the dorm window. And sure enough, this is my old room. So I told President Dovery some years ago that, you know, when Leona and I went to college, we stayed in the same room. Of course, there's several years difference here. And we kind of enjoyed that bit of coincidence. There are a lot of things about the farm I didn't like. I remember we came home about on a Sunday evening in the summertime, and some of the cattle, some young Aberdeen Angus black young cattle, young heifers that my father was keeping for breeding stock, had gotten out of the fence and gotten into a clover field. And it had rained a little bit. Well, the clover and the animals eating all of this, and they bloated. And the one side of the animal came way up, and I remember we had 6 of them, I think, that were terribly bloated. And it looked like they would lay down and just in terrible agony. And so my father took a jackknife out of his pocket, which he always carried, opened up the biggest blade, and went over and jammed the side that was sticking out. And the air just bulged out. And then he'd say, "Vernon, come over here. Stick your fingers in this hole I made and pry it apart so the air can get out, because it would plug up with clover." And then he'd go to the next one. And he'd put my brother on that one. And he'd put the hired man on another one as he went around. And after it was over, we got rid of the pressure. He put a little pine tar on it so the flies wouldn't bother it. All 6 of them recovered. And I thought at the time, you know, this is going to kill these animals. But he knew what he was doing. And there were a lot of things, like we had all these sheep, and they were miserable animals as far as I was concerned. And we had to dip them in a disinfectant of some kind, and then we had to hold their noses so they wouldn't get any of this disinfectant thing in their lungs. And it comes through and splash and fights you and everything else. And I was wet all the way up to my shoulders up there trying to protect their noses. Well, there were just all kinds of little jobs, like milking cows. Oh man, what a miserable job as far as I was concerned. And one time, I remember sitting there kind of like this, looked down at I was in class, and I looked down, sure enough, I had milk drops on my shoe, because I'd milked a cow before we went to Whopper in high school. Oh, I was embarrassed, got my feet together, and came, as soon as it got a break, ran to the bathroom, used paper towels and cleaned up my shoes, because I couldn't let anybody else know that I'd milked a cow before I went to high school. Well, those are some of the things about farm life that I didn't like. I liked a lot of things about it. Very sociable, you knew everybody. Kids all grew up together in a country school, and relatives and cousins all over the place, and go to our little country church and look around and be related to almost everybody in church. There were 2 big families in that little church, and came from different parts of Norway. And the marriages across, I think there were 6 marriages between the 2 big families. I'm a product of one of them. Well, when I get in there, this is my dad's cousin, this is my mother's cousin, and this sort of thing. Anyway, it was there were a lot of things nice about it. The church that we belonged to was a small church, and there were 3 of us in the confirmation class in 1935. And I'm the only one living yet. The girls have all died. I was the only boy. On the farm that I did enjoy was 4-H. There were not too many activities because we were pretty much stuck to the farm. But 4-H was agriculturally related, and although I wasn't interested in agriculture, I did have a prize steer, and I led this prize Hereford steer the 1 mile from the bridge to the 11th Street here on Dakota Avenue on 4-H Day in 1940. And I was wondering how many of my friends out at the college would see me, because I was not very much like a farmer, because I was interested in those other things. But I did have the occasion of leading this steer 1 mile down Dakota Avenue, the main drag here. One of the things that I wanted very much as a growing youngster on the farm was a bicycle or a pony. And with the Depression, my father, no, we can't afford it. So I never had a bicycle, and I never had the pony either. It was, being the oldest of 5, and by the way, these 5 children were born in 6 years. So, poof, just close, you see, and I remember one time driving through Whopper, and we'd been in Fergus Falls with my grandparents, and there was a sign that ice cream cones, 3 dips for a nickel. And there were 5 kids in the car, mother and dad. And I remember him saying to mother in Norwegian, but I understood it, saying, "I'd like to stop too, but I don't have 35 cents." This is how close we were in the financial sense in those days. As I said earlier, it was a barter system pretty much. And there's precious little money around with the crops as poor as they were. Now, getting back to the schools, I went to Syracuse and made that decision to come back and be a teacher. I didn't want to be a public official, and got this job at ULA. And then while I was there, I decided that I'd better look around and see if I can get another scholarship. And so I got a equally good scholarship at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And I'd rather be in Boulder and Colorado than New York anyway. So I got my history degree then in 1945 in masters, and then took a job in Glendive, Montana, teaching in a junior college and a high school, a little of each. And stayed there only 1 year, and then went to Farragut, Idaho, to teach in a civilian school at the naval station there. And I was there when a call came from my old dean at Opera and Science. "Vern, would you be interested in teaching here at Science?" Wow. Get home to Whopper and get my feet under my mother's table and all that at once. So that's how that worked out. I came home then in late 1946, accepted a position out here. The woman who was my teacher and had been teaching for some years had lost her eyesight and was blind through some retina disease. And so that's what created the vacancy. Now, as far as my health is concerned, I was 4 years old when my folks took me to Fergus Falls and my tonsils yanked. My mother's sister was a nurse at the hospital there. I can remember that she seemed to be working against me because I thought she would defend me, but when they came to give me the chloroform and all this sort of thing, and I got rid of my tonsils. Things went along pretty well until I was 15 and I was 6 foot tall. And my back started to give out. And then in 1938, I had a bone transfer from my leg to my back at St. Luke's Hospital in Fargo. And went on from there. The fusion took a pretty good hold until I was in my late 40s or 50s, and then the scoliosis came back somewhat, and it's been progressive ever since. But I'm still here, and I'm very fortunate to have had good medical attention. And in 1974, I was governor of Kiwanis. I was chairman of the school board. I was on the bank board, and I was administrator at the science school. And all of a sudden, I developed a bleeding ulcer. I just had enough energy that I didn't know enough to slow down. And so they took me to Rochester, and it stopped, and I was along pretty well, but I took an annual physical at the Mayo Clinic every year since that time. And that was 1971. Then in 1998, we had been in Florida for the winter, and then a friend of mine from graduate school, my best friends from college were the ones from graduate school, and as Morrison was one, and Dwayne Irvin, and Blaine Mercer. Those became all good friends, and now they're all deceased. But Mrs. Irvin called us to say that he passed away. And he had all kinds of books and things, and they didn't have any children. So could you come and give me some advice on things? So we drove from Florida to Arizona, and we were there for a few days, and they were in Green Valley. And then we went up to Tucson and then up to Mesa to see our good friends, the Grosses from Wahpeton. And then we took off for Wahpeton and got into the high country of Arizona. And I was awfully short of oxygen and breath, and I passed out. Leona was driving and saw the word clinic, so she stopped there. And I collapsed at the door of the clinic. And I lost consciousness for some days, and she flew me back on an airplane to the Mayo Clinic, and that's when I ended up getting a trach here, and now that's been 10 years now, this month. So I've been very fortunate, I think. The things have gone wrong, but have turned out all right, that I'm still here at this age. My first car was a Model T, and my mother tells about going to church, and while the church service was on, there was a heavy rain, and so they came out to the cars, and somehow or other, my mother was holding me in her lap when the canvas type covering that the car had tilted one way, and about a pail of cold water landed on top of me. And she said, I screamed and hollered all the way home. I guess that's why my lungs turned out pretty good. Anyway, that was a Model T. And then in 1926, my dad bought a Chevrolet, roll-up windows, and it was really fancy. It had disc wheels and a bumper and a spare tire hanging on the back of the car. And we had that until 1936, 10 years. And then we kept the old Model T, however, and that's the car that I learned to drive on, because it's much easier because you didn't have a shift on the Model Ts. And later on we got a chance to drive the Chevy, which had a shift. Then we had that until 36, so I said, and then Dad bought another Chevrolet, and my folks took a trip then to the West Coast in 1939 to see the World's Fair in Treasure Island, and to see his brother in Mount Vernon, Washington, and another brother in Montana. So they were gone for about 3 weeks. And my sister, at the time who was 16, was head cook, and I was, and my brother had to run the farm. I remember at the time there was a cholera epidemic for hogs came along. My dad was gone, and so we didn't know what to do. We called the veterinarian that we usually had from Fairmount, and he came, said he'd come, and we didn't know how could we pay him, because we all remember Dad had given him a check. And so we drove down to the bank here in Wahpeton, and we had that old 26 Chevrolet yet. This was 1939. And talk to the banker, and he said, "Oh, like that, your dad's got plenty of money in the bank. You just sign the thing yourself." So we paid the veterinarian off with a check, my dad's check, in which I signed, and we saved the hogs at least. And so that's the only trip that they ever took. And my dad used to say, because he had a heart attack later on during the war, and then he couldn't travel anymore. You should travel and get around when you still can, because he felt he'd made a mistake in this thing. My dad was telling me that the Model T cost him $300 brand new, and that in 1916, his father and my mother's father bought a Rio car, which is kind of a fancy car for that period of time. And these cars were available right there in Morton, little town. And that Rio cost $1,170. And a lot of farmers thought that was an awful lot. My grandfather, Hektner, on the old estate, built a new house in 1916. A big square white house. Of course, no electricity, no plumbing in the house or anything like that. And the house must have been 40 feet square. It was a big house, 2-story, with a big attic on top of that. And it cost $1,400 for the house. So you get some idea of how much inflation is taking care of it, especially from during most of my economic life. The time that we had an apartment in town here for $45 furnished, and I made my $1,530 for the whole year. Things like that, and saved enough money to go to graduate school the next year, for part of it at least. Henry Ford used to say that, you could buy a Model T, get any color you want, so long as it was black. I remember all the black cars in those days. And when we got that 26 Chevy, it was green. And we were so proud of this green car, because all the Fords were, in those days, black. I got my first airplane ride when I was about 12. Mother's cousin had an airplane on the farm out south of Morton, and there was a big celebration on a rededication, I think, of the fort at Abercrombie. And this Oliver Huss was barnstorming and giving rides. So we went out there and he gave us a ride. Don and I were together in the front, and he was as pilot behind. And we had the goggles on, and took off. And it was so noisy, with the wind howling and the engine and all that, you just couldn't even talk. But it was a thrill to look down first time and see what things looked from the air. First airplane ride, a biplane, 2 wings, and open pits, nothing but the sky above you, and windy, of course, with the when the airplane was moving. One of the things that influenced my life, of course, was World War II. With my back, I had to be registered for service, and immediately I got that 4F thing, which meant I was unfit for service. And I felt a little bad about that with all my friends going into the service. In 1941, when I graduated from science school here, that summer they started what was called CPT, Civilian Pilot Training. You could learn to fly a plane free. The government paid for it as a civilian. And a lot of the young men from the college, my age, took up this. And of course, when the war started, they were among the first to go in. And they were in the flying area. And of course, the casualty rate was awfully high because with each mission, you cut your chances somewhat. And I was in a chemistry class at science, and there was 21 people in this class. And I think 4 were girls. And then there was a couple of guys like me that couldn't get in the service. So there was 15 maybe or so left. And of that class, over 50% of them lost their lives in the Second World War. One of my best friends, a farm boy that belonged to our church, he's a year older than I was, joined the National Guard, went to Guadalcanal and was severely wounded. Came back to San Francisco, Letterman's Hospital there for about 2 years, and then was deemed well enough to go back to active service, which he did, and he was killed in Belgium shortly before the war was over. The Legion Post in Morton is named after him. So there were a lot of things striking close. The pilot, my mother's cousin, that gave us the ride at Fort Abercrombie, lost his life in the war. So there were casualties. One of my friends was in the Navy, and a Japanese shell came along and spattered him all over the deck, I guess. And he was the only son of a farmer around here by Grapevine, and a very good friend of mine. So there were those darker moments during the year, but I do remember the joy of VE Day and VJ Day and so on as we came through this thing.
We were married June 22nd in 1949, and it was in the Richland church where I'd been baptized, confirmed, and it was a nice, beautiful wedding, but it was a humid day. It must have been 99%. It was just terribly humid. And in fact, my brother was just about to the point, he was an attendant, and he was just about to the point of passing out. Anyway, and I stood by the altar and I was just dripping because it was so humid. And of course, I had a satin wedding dress, which was not what you'd say cool. So it was a real hot day. And I think Vernon can tell about the weather during the wedding.
Well, it happened to be, as she said, one of the most humid days. It must have been 100%. And during the ceremony, you could see through to the north, the stained glass window, and see the lightning flashing and the thunder rolling while we were getting married. I wonder if there was some portent to that for the future for us. But it surely didn't amount to that way. This wedding was, as she said, in 1949. We were engaged in April of 1948, but her father felt rather strongly that inasmuch as her mother died in January, she had to wait a whole year. So I always say that she was well worth waiting for. Although I think I was a little impatient, maybe, to have waited. The engagement was 14, 15 months because of that. I must admit, hear that some of those precious moments, my whole life, were those few minutes that I spent with her mother in the hospital in Breckenridge. And I listened to her and talked to her, and I thought, she's such a beautiful woman. And it was so tragic that her life was cut short so soon.
She was 60 when she passed
Just
away.
60. And such a, I could tell, a wonderful woman. So, I felt, all mother-in-law jokes aside, I did miss something.
We lived on the campus in student housing for 5 years, and quite a few of the faculty did live in that housing to begin with. And then after that is when we decided to build our own. But we got to know the faculty quite soon that way because we were living close together. And we took part, of course, in things on the campus that went on, because we lived right there. And what you had to that, but
Yeah, it was very comfortable. It was heated by the regular heating system for the total campus, so there was no shortage of heat. And it was furnished, so you didn't make any investments. Our actual first piece of furniture that we bought together, shortly, only a few months after we were married, and moved into the apartment, was that piano there.
yeah, that's
And it's the oldest piece of furniture that we bought new, and which she has used certainly weekly, almost daily sometimes, down through the years. All four of the kids learned to play on it, and it was quite an investment for us at that time. I think it cost something like $650.
Well, one of our problems after we were married, is the fact that we wanted a family and had a problem with fertility. And so after about, 9 years, I guess, we decided to adopt a child. And when we went up to Fargo to see this child, for some reason, I had envisioned a scrawny, abused child, and but we got there, and here was this beautiful, round-faced, big blue-eyed baby girl. And because of a lack of social workers at that time, she was 9 months old. And so it didn't take us long to fall in love with her. So we took her home, and we were so excited about that.
I must comment that the idea of adoption was entirely her idea, and I could tell from how strongly she felt about it. I suppose maybe the maternal instinct is stronger than the paternal, and so I went along with it. But the minute I saw that girl with those big blue eyes, I would have given my life for her. There was no doubt about it after that.
So then, 2 years later, we adopted the second girl. And so we were real happy with our family.
I could comment there that one of the reasons when they asked us in the interviews whether we wanted a boy or a girl, I said girl because we had just come through World War II and the Korean War. And I thought, if this is going to be the only child we're going to get, it's a lot safer to have a girl than a boy. And so that was our thing. And then we were so much in love with the girl, we wanted another girl.
So then after 14 years, what happened, but we had our own girl born to us on Thanksgiving Day. And precluding that, we had to add on to our house because our house wasn't big enough. So we had our house added on to that summer before she was born. And then 3 years later, our son was born on my 42nd birthday. I brought him home from the hospital. He'd been born 4 days before that. So we had 4 children, which we were really, at one time, surprised we'd have any. So we were very happy with our family, and they're such a good bunch of kids. They love each other, and they're so compassionate and really enjoy each other very much.
I could just comment a little about the house. We lived in a student housing there for 5 years. And then there's a lot came open that Leona's employer owned. And so she bought the lot. And it's only 50 feet off of the campus. Only one house between us and the campus. Ideal location. And so she bought that, and then I contacted the housing people at the science school. They were doing the drawings, drafting and estimating people. And the head there said, well, I haven't got anything to do. He's a bachelor. He said, I'll draw some plans for you. What do you want? And he asked a bunch of questions. And he gave us some plans. And so we built that in 1954. And then when Kara was coming, and we felt we needed additional space, so we went into phase 2 and built a rather large addition to it. We have some pictures of both the front and the back of the house that could be used here. It was a lot of our own ideas, and it was a very modest house, but very functional, and we were very happy.
Very good.
Wonderful.
Sometimes I was the house, and my garage was closer to my office than I could find a parking spot on campus. So I was always home for noon, lunch.
I think I made an error when I said that our son was born 3 years after our last daughter. It was really 5 years after. But anyway. Yes, when our oldest daughter, Sonia, got married, I asked her if she wanted to use my wedding dress, and she did. So we made a few adjustments, but it worked out well. And she was very happy with it. So that worked out real well. And yes, they were all married by the same pastor, and we were very happy with their marriages, I feel, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, Joel, of course, married in her church in Mayville, so, and so that's,
We talked about our Norwegian heritage. Well, that heritage is not something that is being transmitted, because Joel's wife is German, a German heritage, Germans from Russia, and Kara's husband also had his grandparents come from Russia, and the other girls too had. So they're all Americans now. They're not the types that we, and it surely doesn't mean anything. We're not disinheriting our heritage when we say this, but they're all wonderful people, and we couldn't wish for anything more.
we have 8 grandchildren, 6 grandsons, and 2 granddaughters. And they range now from age 25,
Six.
6 even, 26 to 3, so we have quite a range there. And we enjoy the grandchildren so much. Now we have 4 grandchildren in Fargo, and of course we get to see them a little more often than the ones in Florida and South Dakota. But now in the last few years we've been following them in some of their sports and things. Both their 2 older grandkids in Florida are involved in basketball and are doing quite well, and they're also in music and band, and so they're. It's been fun to follow them, and when we get to Florida, we follow them in their sports. So that's been fun.
I think we should have a little more about our children before we get into the
Oh, yeah.
grandchildren too. That all four of them are college graduates,
That's right.
and all four did very well in college. That Joel was coming out of high school a presidential scholar and got a medal when we were present from President Reagan at the White House. And then he went from there to Princeton University, which I see that U.S. News is rated as the #1 university in America. And he's been the girls have done very well too, but they would all agree, I'm sure, that Joel has been something special. And being a scholar as he is, and he's 6'5" tall and very noticeable, very humble, and we're very proud of him, as we are of the girls too, because they've all done extremely well. One of the girls in South Dakota has a master's degree. So we're so thrilled with what our children have done, and now they're bringing in the grandchildren for us, and one great-grandchild so far.
Mm-hmm.
57 years ago, I joined Kiwanis here in town, and I worked up through the president of the club, and then lieutenant governor for this district, and then eventually governor for the 3 states of the Dakotas and North Dakota. And I had 136 clubs in my territory at that time. And this was 1970 and 71. And before that and after that, we attended the international conventions. And so, and we made this a family thing. Took the kids along, and we were in Anaheim, and California, went to Disneyland with the kids, and we were in Miami, stopped in at Orlando and saw Disney World and the other attractions that Orlando has, Epcot and some of those things. So it was and then we were in Montreal, and we were, the year I was governor, we were in Atlantic City on the boardwalk. And we've been in St. Louis for the Arctic and all that, and Denver, I think twice, 2 different conventions, Seattle, 1 convention, and so we've had a lot of fun with them. One of the things we've done when we go on these is hit the historical sites. I remember the first time that Leona and I went east, and I was apologizing all the way because I wanted to stop at Gettysburg, the battlefield. And, well, yeah, I guess we'll be all right. We got there, and she looked around. Man, I didn't know that they had all these things. How do you know all this stuff about Gettysburg and where Lincoln talked and all of those things?
Historian.
And she was more thrilled about this than I was when we got done.
Our children were involved in activities at the high school. They all were in band, and I think Sonia was even in the choir there for a couple of years, I believe. And Joel was in scouting, and he was an Eagle Scout at the age of 14, and he really really enjoyed scouting, and he still is interested in scouting.
I might say that this is the coming of the computer age, and what he did for his Eagle Scout project was to line up where he could get some free computers from various places, including one of his own, and he took them to the parochial school, Catholic parochial school here, and talked to the sister and made arrangements so they could bring those in. And he gave, and some of his scouts, instructions on the computer for the first time those kids had ever been exposed to it. It was a marvelously well thought out and a well done project. I might say about computers, he was about 13 when he came to us. He'd been peddling papers in town here and saved his money. And he came and said, "There's a computer down at Radio Shack I want to buy. And it's $900, and I only got about $760. And could you kind of loan me a little money so I could buy this computer?" And my reaction was, well, these computers get out of date so quick, it's not a good investment, blah, blah, blah. And then one day I said to Leona, well, maybe he could want a motorcycle. And she said, "Let's get the computer."
So he got the computer. And we were never sorry for that.
No, we never said. He spent hours on the
So
thing and
anyway,
enjoyed it. And then he took some computer courses at the college when he was
in high
13,
school.
14, 15 years old.
Yeah. Carol was the president of Key Club, and she was always thinking about things to earn money for their group. And one time I know she had, they served barbecues after a game, or before a game, I should say.
During intermission.
And during intermission, and so
Yes.
she was in charge of that. And then there were sometimes when she would bring, I'd make rolls, and she'd bring fresh rolls to school, and the faculty would buy them for their lunch breaks, and she made some money that way. And anyway, she really enjoyed that. She was really, and right now there isn't such a thing in high school.
Yeah,
So,
and they had at that time 70 members.
yeah.
And
Oh.
within a few years it all played out.
I was thinking of Sonia and Arla were in a swim team when they were quite young. And that was not a school thing, it was well, I suppose,
Park
yeah,
board.
the park board. And they went to swim meets in different towns, and they really did well. And they'd go to swim practice at 7 in the morning, and one June, I remember, was so cold, they'd come home on their bicycles with wet towels around their neck, and they were just blue. And I thought to myself, you couldn't pay me to go out there and do that. But I didn't say that. The girls went to science first, so they were home, but I guess the one that we noticed the most was the last one, of course, and we took him to Princeton and came back alone. And that was kind of, it put a lump in our throat because, it was quite far away, and we knew that it would be a while before he'd come.